It was the evening of August 30, 1977, in Enfield, a quiet town in North London. The Hodgson family lived in a small council house at 284 Green Street. Life was simple, but not easy. Peggy Hodgson, a single mother, worked hard to raise her 4 children: Margaret, aged 13, Janet, aged 11, Johnny, aged 10, and Billy, just 7. Money was always tight, and the children often argued like most siblings. Yet despite their struggles, it was a home filled with love. That night, something happened that no one could ever explain. It began quietly, almost in a way that could be ignored. Janet and Johnny were getting ready for bed when they noticed their chest of drawers moving slightly. At first, they thought it was their imagination. But then, the heavy wooden dresser shifted again, slowly, scraping across the floor as if pushed by invisible hands. "Stop it, Johnny," Janet shouted, thinking her brother was playing a trick. "I'm not touching it," Johnny replied, his eyes wide. The chest of drawers moved another few inches, this time with more force. Janet, feeling both excited and terrified, pushed it back against the wall. But before she could step away, the dresser lurched forward again, stronger than before. Janet screamed for her mother. Peggy rushed upstairs, annoyed, thinking the children were just making noise. "What's going on up here?" she demanded. "The drawers, Mum, they're moving by themselves," Janet cried, pointing at the dresser. Peggy frowned. "Don't be silly." She grabbed the heavy dresser with both hands and pushed it firmly against the wall. But as she stood back, to her horror, the drawers began sliding forward once more, inch by inch, as if some invisible force was pulling them. Peggy's face drained of color. She quickly shoved the dresser back again, but it felt as if something was resisting her, pushing against her strength. Then, before her eyes, the dresser moved several feet across the room with a loud scraping sound. Terrified, Peggy shouted, "That's enough. Stop it." She tried to drag the dresser back, but this time it wouldn't budge. It was as if unseen hands were holding it firmly in place. Janet and Johnny clung to each other, their eyes wide with fear. "Mum, what's happening?" Johnny whispered. Peggy's heart raced. She had no answer. She grabbed her children and rushed them out of the room. They ran down the stairs, their footsteps thundering against the wooden floor. Margaret and Billy, confused and sleepy, came out of their rooms asking what was wrong. Peggy simply said, "Something's not right. We're not staying up there tonight." The children huddled together in the living room, too frightened to sleep. The house, once ordinary, now felt heavy, dark, and alive with something unseen. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the wind outside made them jump. In the silence, Janet whispered, "Mum, I hear knocking." Everyone listened. At first, nothing. Then, faint but clear. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow taps echoed through the walls. Peggy froze. "It's just the pipes," she said quickly, though her voice trembled. But the knocking came again, louder this time, traveling from one wall to another, as if something unseen was moving through the house. The children whimpered, holding on to each other. The night stretched on endlessly. Peggy, exhausted but too afraid to sleep, sat awake on the sofa with her children around her. She thought of all the explanations: bad plumbing, drafts, maybe even the kids playing tricks. But deep inside, she knew something unnatural had begun. By morning, Peggy decided to ask her neighbors, the Nottinghams, for help. She told them about the moving dresser and the knocking sounds. The neighbors, curious but skeptical, agreed to come over that night. When darkness fell again, the Hodgsons sat nervously with the Nottinghams in the living room. For a while, nothing happened. The house seemed calm, almost mocking them. But then, just as everyone began to relax, the knocking started again. Knock, knock, knock. Mr. Nottingham frowned. "Where's that coming from?" He tapped the wall, trying to find a loose board, but the knocks answered back, 3 sharp raps that made everyone jump. "Mrs. Nottingham clutched her husband's arm. "Peggy, there's something strange here." The children cried softly. Janet covered her ears, whispering, "Make it stop. Please make it stop." As the night wore on, the knocking grew louder, more violent. Sometimes it seemed to come from inside the walls, sometimes from the ceiling. Objects began to shake slightly, small things like cups or toys rattling as if touched by invisible fingers. The Nottinghams left in shock, promising to call the police. When the officers arrived later that night, they too witnessed unusual events. One officer even reported seeing a chair move across the floor without anyone touching it. Though they couldn't explain it, they wrote it down in their official report. For the Hodgson family, this was only the beginning. What started as small knocks and a moving dresser would soon become one of the most famous and terrifying hauntings in history. And Janet, the young girl who had first seen the dresser move, would soon find herself at the very center of it all. The Hodgson family thought the nightmare might pass, that perhaps the knocking and moving dresser were only a strange, temporary disturbance. But as the days turned into weeks, the strange activity inside 284 Green Street only grew stronger, louder, and more terrifying. It began with small objects. Toys left neatly in boxes were suddenly scattered across the floor. Chairs rocked without anyone near them. The children's beds shook at night, as if invisible hands were rattling the frames. Janet, in particular, seemed to be at the center of the chaos. Whenever she entered a room, things happened. Lights flickered, knocks sounded, or objects shifted. One evening, as Peggy tucked her children into bed, a loud crash echoed from upstairs. She rushed back into Janet and Margaret's room and saw their beds shaking violently. The girls screamed as their blankets were yanked away by unseen forces. Peggy tried to grab the covers, but they were ripped from her hands and flung across the room. Terrified, she shouted, "Stop it! Leave my children alone!" But the room fell into silence only after the girls were sobbing uncontrollably. The neighbors, once skeptical, now believed something unexplainable was happening. They told Peggy, "You need help, professional help. This isn't normal." Reluctantly, Peggy contacted the local media and the Society for Psychical Research, hoping someone might explain what was happening. When reporters from the Daily Mirror arrived, they expected to write a short article about a family imagining things. They set up their cameras in the house, waiting for something unusual. For hours, nothing happened. Then, just as they began to pack up, marbles and Lego bricks flew across the room, whizzing past their heads at incredible speed. One reporter yelped in pain as a Lego brick struck him hard on the forehead, leaving a red mark. "That came out of nowhere," he exclaimed. The reporters, now pale and shaken, wrote their story, and soon the Enfield house became the talk of London. Paranormal investigators Maurice Grosse and Guy Leon Playfair were assigned to study the case. They moved into the Hodgson home, determined to find the truth. The researchers quickly realized the haunting was unlike anything they had seen before. They witnessed objects flying through the air, chairs toppling over, and even a heavy fireplace being torn out of the wall. But the most disturbing phenomena involved Janet herself. Late one night, Maurice and Guy were woken by screams from Janet's room. They rushed in and saw something chilling. Janet was levitating above her bed, her body stiff, her hair falling around her face. She floated nearly 3 feet in the air, her arms outstretched. The investigators shouted her name, but Janet's eyes were closed as if she were unconscious. Suddenly, she dropped heavily back onto the bed with a thud. Photographers captured images of Janet being thrown from her bed across the room. In one famous shot, she appears midair, her mouth open in a scream, as if some invisible force had hurled her. Skeptics claimed she was only jumping, but the investigators insisted the movement was unnatural, too violent, and too frequent to be a prank. Soon, the strange knocks and movements developed into something even more disturbing: voices. At night, Janet began speaking in a deep, gravelly tone, completely unlike her own young voice. She claimed it was not her speaking but Bill, a spirit of an old man who had once lived in the house. "I used to sit in that chair," the voice growled one evening, coming from Janet's mouth as she sat slumped, eyes closed. The sound was so rough and low that it made the listener's skin crawl. "I died in this house." Investigators were astonished. They tested Janet by filling her mouth with water and asking the voice to continue. To their shock, the strange guttural sound carried on, even as the water remained in her mouth. Doctors later examined Janet's throat and concluded it was impossible for a child her age to produce such a harsh, sustained voice without damaging her vocal cords. The family grew exhausted. Night after night, they endured the noises, the flying objects, the strange voices. Furniture toppled over with no warning, toys flew across rooms, and the children were sometimes thrown from their beds. Peggy admitted, "We can't live like this anymore. It's breaking us." Neighbors avoided the house. Some crossed the street rather than walk past 284 Green Street. Word spread quickly, and curious onlookers sometimes gathered outside, hoping to glimpse something strange through the windows. But for the Hodgsons, it was no spectacle, it was daily fear. Even the police admitted they had no answers. One officer signed a statement saying she saw a chair slide across the floor, 4 feet in a perfectly straight line, without anyone touching it. Another said he heard loud knocks with no visible source. Yet despite their reports, the police could do nothing. By the end of 1977, the Hodgson family was trapped in a nightmare. They were living in a house that seemed alive, a place where the rules of reality broke down. For the children, sleep became impossible. For Peggy, hope faded. And for Janet, the strange girl at the center of it all, life was no longer normal. She was only 11 years old, but already, she was being called possessed. And as the winter set in, the activity only grew more violent. By early 1978, the Hodgson family's ordeal had drawn national attention. The once quiet home on Green Street was now the most investigated house in England. Journalists, photographers, paranormal researchers, and even priests came and went, all desperate to witness the phenomena for themselves. Some left as skeptics, others as believers, but nearly all admitted they had seen or heard something unusual inside the house. For the Hodgsons, the constant attention only added to their exhaustion. Peggy, the mother, felt torn. On one hand, she was relieved people believed her family. On the other hand, she feared that no one could actually stop what was happening. The children, especially Janet, became overwhelmed by the endless questions. Why me? She often cried. Why is it always me? The activity reached new peaks during this period. Objects flew across rooms with violent force. A curtain wrapped itself tightly around Janet's neck as though trying to choke her. Beds shook so violently that neighbors could hear the banging through the walls. The strange, gravelly voice that spoke through Janet continued, sometimes lasting for hours, answering investigators' questions, laughing cruelly, or mocking the family. One chilling night, investigators recorded Janet speaking in that voice while dozens of objects crashed around the room. The voice identified itself again as Bill, claiming he had died in the house years before. I went blind, the voice growled. I died in that chair downstairs. Weeks later, records confirmed that a man named Bill Wilkins had indeed lived and died in the house, his death caused by a brain hemorrhage while sitting in a chair. This discovery shocked the investigators. How could an 11-year-old girl know such details? Skeptics argued that Janet could have overheard the information from neighbors, but believers insisted the accuracy was too uncanny. The press, hungry for sensational headlines, published dramatic photographs of Janet seemingly levitating across her bedroom. Some readers dismissed them as staged, while others saw undeniable proof that something beyond science was occurring. But not everyone was convinced. Some journalists accused Janet and Margaret of faking certain incidents. They pointed out moments when the girls admitted to exaggerating events to test the investigators. Janet herself later admitted, "We did fake a few things, just to see if people would catch us." But not all of it. Most of it was real. Too real. For the Hodgson family, whether people believed or not didn't matter, the fear they lived with was real. Peggy confessed to friends, "I just want my children safe. I don't care if people laugh at us. We are living in hell." The Society for Psychical Research continued their study for more than a year, collecting hundreds of hours of recordings, photographs, and eyewitness testimonies. Maurice Grosse, who had lost his own daughter years before, felt personally connected to the Hodgsons and defended them passionately. He insisted that the case was genuine, describing dozens of moments he had seen with his own eyes, chairs sliding, objects floating, voices speaking from nowhere. But skeptics from other organizations dismissed the case as the result of children's tricks, stress, and suggestible investigators. They argued that young girls seeking attention could easily fake knocking noises, throw objects, or even leap from beds to appear as if levitating. Yet despite these criticisms, the sheer number of witnesses, including police officers, reporters, neighbors, and investigators, gave the case more credibility than most haunting stories. By mid-1978, the activity began to slow. Perhaps the family grew stronger, perhaps the strange force grew weaker. Life at 284 Green Street returned to a fragile kind of normal. The knocks became less frequent, the flying objects rarer. The voice still appeared occasionally, but its power seemed to fade. Eventually, the haunting stopped almost entirely. The Hodgsons were left with scars, emotional, mental, and physical. Janet, now a teenager, struggled to move past the events. "It ruined my childhood," she later said. "I didn't feel normal. Everyone looked at me like I was different." Margaret agreed. "It was frightening. You never knew when it would happen." Yet both sisters also stood by their story for the rest of their lives. In interviews decades later, they insisted, "It was real. We didn't make it up." 2. Many people saw it. Today, the Enfield poltergeist remains one of the most famous and debated paranormal cases in history. Books were written, documentaries filmed, and even a Hollywood movie inspired by the events. To believers, it stands as proof that unseen forces exist, forces that can break through the walls of reality and terrorize ordinary families. To skeptics, it is an example of how fear, stress, and imagination can create powerful illusions. But for the Hodgson family, it was never about proof or belief. It was about survival. It was about a mother protecting her children from something she could not see or fight. It was about two young girls who became the unwilling faces of one of the strangest hauntings the world has ever known. And so, the story of the Enfield poltergeist lives on, a broken piece of reality that continues to haunt both skeptics and believers alike. Was it truly a ghost? A poltergeist? A cry for attention? Or was it something even stranger, something science has yet to understand? No matter the explanation, the question remains: what really happened in that small London house on Green Street?